So, welcome everybody. This is Chia's new plot format, and it will be our last AMA of the year. So, thank you to everybody who has joined in these events over the last few months. Bram and I have been able to discuss some really interesting topics in our tech talks and then also in our AMAs. We have changed this month's Tech Talk into an AMA about the plot format because it is one of the coolest things that is coming out over the next year and a half or so. And it's going to be one of the most impactful for those involved in the Chia ecosystem. Now, Bram, before we dive too much into the plot format itself, we have a nice high level question for you. And
Yeah.
somebody is asking about your clean currency swag. Where do
Oh,
you get one?
no, I don't remember. It says stuff on the back that I don't remember what it says, but that's the thing. I don't remember exactly what we had this for. I got it somewhere.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I know there's been some talk and some rumblings about some other swag potentially in the near future, so definitely keep an eye open for that. And
Yeah, pester Gene about that, not me, please.
understandable. Or feel free to reach out to me also.
Yeah.
Now, Bram, let's go ahead and start right in on the plot format here,
Mhm.
and let's do a high level look at it. What are kind of the key benefits of the new proof of space format for both new and existing farmers?
Yeah, so the motivating benefit of it is that it doesn't have grinding. Or has extremely small potential for grinding. I shouldn't say zero, but most likely people aren't really going to be doing any grinding on it. The whole point of proof of space is you don't want there to be time-space trade-offs. You just have the storage capacity. It's sitting around board. Farming, you're not using a lot of CPU as you're working off of it. Um, uh, and we had that working very well for a while. It's working less well now because a few different people, uh, basically Mad Max, no SSD, and Dr. Nick himself, figured out grinding attacks on it that are practical. So you can get a whole bunch of computational power and get a lot more credit for your space than you should. So I've been collaborating with Nick, who's the Dr. Nick of Dr. Plotter fame, to work on the new plot format, and well, technically speaking, it's a new um, proof of space algorithm, which implies a plot format. It doesn't necessarily particular force you. The consensus algorithm doesn't know what plot format you used. It just knows that you made a successful proof of space. But we're making a very good plot format for the new proof of space algorithm as part of the release for it. So that's yeah, so it is extremely resistant to grinding attacks. It's a whole categories of them. Really what happened at a high level is the kinds of attacks we were thinking about when we designed it in the first place, those haven't happened. What's happened is these hinting attacks where people make a bunch of data structures that aren't what we intended and can use those for grinding. And we hadn't really considered those very much, and they're not really that easy to figure out, actually. But now that we know about those sorts of things, and Nick knows about them a lot more than I do, we've been able to design something that's highly resistant to them. So it's been a lot of really very algorithmic work on the new format, but that's the big advantage to it. Some more gimmies that we're kind of throwing in there with it. Well, the big one is that there are the smallest K size is much smaller. So it goes down to probably K28 is going to be the smallest plot size that is supported. So that will be nice because people will be able to fill in the last little bit of stuff on their things. Also, it makes it so that if you happen to have a much lower end computer that's doing your farming, it can work better off of those. So that's the at the expense of having to do more seeks on hard drives. So that's the set of trade-offs there. Another thing that matters to me a lot, because I sure put a lot of work into it. Whenever you're doing compression, there's this question of what really are the semantics of your data? What are the theoretical limits of the compression that you can get out of it? Um, So, in terms of stuff that I was babbling about on the old proof of space format, in terms of non-grindy but like information theoretic compression, I was always talking about two things. One of them being one of them being that the back pointers are not compressed, and the other one being that there's potential inlining attacks. And so for the new format, I figured out how to do a bunch of this stuff using what's called Banish compression. Um, and so we might make that part of the standard plot format. It depends how much extra resources are necessary to actually do Banish compression. But we definitely figured out how to do Banish compression and have figured out done some subtle tweaks to the format to make it so that it's nicer on the theory of even if you make it uglier, it's not going to stop it from happening. It's just going to make it so whoever does figure out how to do it has more of an advantage. So what you want for things like that is for everyone to do it, and it's not a big deal. And Banish compression is not a grinding attack. It's a subtle information theoretic, just better compression thing. Um, and also, we're doing some tweaks to make it so that the potential for inlining is vastly less than it was before. So most of the theoretical compression is taken care of. There's still some, which still bugs me, that there's like kind of like cycle compression and these like bits that Banish compression loses for reasons that are really hard to wrap your brain around. Um, but those would require some really sophisticated data structure that I have no idea how to do it. Like Banish compression is already pretty sophisticated, um, and the amount that you would get out of them is much smaller than what you have already. And we've taken countermeasures to make it to make the potential benefits be pretty minimal. So anyway, that's theoretical to most people, but we're way ahead of the game on potential attacks that no one had figured out in the old format in the new format as well. So yeah, and maybe someone in industry somewhere will actually get excited about using the Banish compression for something else because it's a general purpose. If you have a truly ginormous graph that you need to be able to look stuff up on, in particular, a truly enormous bipartite graph that you need to be able to look stuff up on very quickly, and you really, really care about compressing it, it does a really, really good job of that. So maybe someone else will have a use for that other than just us.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm always impressed and blown away by how deep you guys dive into all of those different knobs and all of those different ways to potentially attack the actual proof of space or the plot formats to figure out how to make it more secure, how to make it more hardened. And
Yeah,
yeah,
this stuff actually, there's not too much knob twiddling going on here. The actual new proof of space algorithm doesn't look that weird if you just look at the code. I mean, it's mysterious looking at the code. It's like, why are you doing that? I don't understand. Um, uh, and some of it is to intentionally mess with certain things, and some of it is to enable certain things. Um, but it doesn't, other than being mysterious, it doesn't look nasty. It just looks mysterious. And the reasons behind everything in it are very coherent. So I'm very, very happy with what we've got right now. There's still a little bit of tweakage that's happening in the whole thing, but we're, yeah, feeling very good about it.
absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, and in particular, Banish compression, the only thing we really did explicitly to enable that was to make the graph, to make matching bipartite, which we were thinking about doing just because it seemed like a good idea anyway. So, but yeah. Yeah. Actually, no, it was already bipartite for totally unrelated reasons. So yeah, actually not very much specific tweaking to enable Banish specifically. Yeah. Anyway,
Okay.
go on.
Oh, cool, cool. Kind of to that point, I know we've had a few different iterations or versions, if you will, of this new plot format.
Yeah.
And, previously we were saying finish compression would be an SSD only. Now it might be on HDD also or possible.
Yeah.
The question that we have from one of our users is how many iterations of the new plot format were there before landing on this one?
Oh, we haven't had explicit drafts of it. but a bunch. Like there's been like we've been working on ideas, and then it's not like we've been making a full-blown implementation and then throwing it and doing the next one. So we've been iterating on thoughts and doing analysis and stuff like that. But it's been like for this year, like Nick has spent most of his time over the year working on it, and I've spent like half my time over the year working on it. So it's been, and that's like mostly been analysis and iteration and stuff like that. And Harold and Rohan have also been working on it, but more on the implementation and the specification side of things.
Gotcha. Yeah, excellent team for sure to be able to build this out and have all the best minds working on it.
Mhm.
Now, we touched on a few of the different challenges and the risks associated with releasing the new format, and this is
Mhm.
less about the security things we're trying to resolve and more about what it actually takes to switch from the old plot format to the new plot format. Do you mind discussing kind of what those challenges are, why there's a
Uh,
phase-in period?
well, yeah. So, well, there's a few different sets of challenges here. None of them are terribly bad. You just have to execute well. It's not this. It's not a big engineering lift. It's just a matter of being careful. So, the first thing is to get a smooth transition in. So you don't want like a red letter day where all of a sudden, kerchunk, everyone goes over and everyone's madly replotting and stuff like that. So there's going to be a phase in period where at the beginning of the phase in period, the new plot format is actually slightly disfavored. And then it becomes increasingly more favored over the entirety of the phase in period. And at the end of the phase in period, the old format just doesn't work at all. It's just blocked because its quality is getting multiplied by zero at that point. So it's just gone. But the idea behind having a transitionary period is to make it so like not everyone is going to be replotting at the same time. And it's sort of, there's going to be a range of times when you're sort of neutral about whether you should be on the old or the new format. So you can sort of at your leisure upgrade instead of just madly freaking out and trying to get it all done on one day. Um, and there's a whole bunch of like the wallets and everyone using the whole thing, exchanges uh, and well, explorers and everybody need to be upgraded to be cognizant of the new format uh, before it happens, which is mostly just going to involve like upgrading full nodes. It's like it doesn't touch the coin set in the slightest, so that's good. Um, but there needs to be plenty of advance warning around that, and there needs to be, general consensus that this is a good idea. So I think we've done a really great job of making this be a very specific, like, be a clear improvement, um, and not have any controversial gunk thrown in with it at the same time. So I'm feeling quite good about that. But it needs to be very uncontroversial because it's a hard fork, and those are prone to awfulness if they're at all controversial. Um, so I mean, we're not going to make everyone be 100% bought in because there will always be someone who just wants to be contrarian or something. But I think we're going to be able to get broad support for this quite nicely. Um, and then there's just the act of doing the replotting. And people have made very clear they want really, really nice utilities for cleanly doing all the replotting and stuff. So they just press the button and say, do the replot. And it goes ahead and does it. Maybe, they might want to have it, so that it schedules start the replot on this date and, automatically, especially if you have a big farm, automatically, swap, delete just as much as you need to of your old plots as you're adding in the new format plots as you go, yada, yada, yada. Whenever you have extra space, maybe use like K32s, but then fill in that last little bit with a bunch of K28s or something, like that kind of stuff. People want that to be as automatic as possible. And the plan is we will make that very nice and seamless and automatic, although that's actually not the job of the team that's working on it right now, because we're like back end of the back end way never lands that an end user never sees. So uh, so that's going to be a different team building that stuff, but we will build that out very nicely before launch. That's a little bit of a question mark now is we're not quite entirely sure what the status of Banish compression is going to be on the actual activation date. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We had a question regarding that phase-in period
Yeah.
and regarding the incentives to replot. As you
Mhm.
mentioned, the phase-in period will start with the new plot format disfavored to the old plot format.
Yeah,
And
but
so the
barely.
question is,
Just
yeah,
to make sure. Yeah.
yep, exactly, yeah, just barely disfavored. But the question is, would we expect anyone to start replotting prior to that parity?
Um, Maybe it depends. Like if you're going to be replotting very slowly, you might start replotting in advance, right? It might be worth it to you to do that, depending on exactly how the math works out. I don't think that's normally going to be the case because if you start replotting in advance, the new things are worth zero as you're during that front running it phase. So I think for the most part, the earliest people are going to be replotting is at the very start of the transition period, and the yeah the and depending on what setup people have, people who are grinding the old stuff, it might be that they want to wait a while before starting their transition, right? Just because that's how the math is going to work out for them. Or people who are not compressing their old plots much at all might just jump in immediately day one. Um, uh, yeah, even with the disfavor, you might, if you're going to be replotting slowly, you might just start it immediately. Um, so, uh, uh, yeah, that I think that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think the only thing I would add to that is we also have a great community of developers who run plots and farms on testnet. So we might also see some of them having to, or having already created these new plots and then swap them over to mainnet,
Yeah,
even when it is disfavored.
we'll have testnet do something before mainnet does something on this. Like,
Hmm.
really want to make that happen. I don't think we've put much thought into it. Like, we can abuse testnet all we want, so we might actually want to make it so that testnet has a transition period of like 2 months or something, and just like put it through serious abuse before even the activation date happens on mainnet.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, be able to truly test the worst case scenario there.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, thank you. Let's see here. I appreciate all the high level stuff here. And, we went through a portion of the timeline there and just kind of recap. We should be expecting the chip out probably Q1 of next year. And then that kind of kicks off the rest of the cycle thereafter.
Yeah, we're actually working on implementation now. So we have enough stuff that we can make an implementation at the moment. We're kind of anticipating we'll likely want to like tweak like the encryption algorithm. That's not really an encryption algorithm that we use somewhere in it, but things like that. But to my mind, the precondition of having a chip out is having a working implementation of something. So something that can make a plot, respond to a challenge, and verify the proof of space that comes out of it. So that's what we need in order to have a chip out. So that's what we're working towards now.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, that'll be great. And then I know in the past we had mentioned that we might be releasing a tool that allows people to see the different levers that were used to determine the new plot format or the new proof of space format. And
Yeah,
previously we said that might not come out just because there aren't as many levers that are actually manipulated.
we kind of forgot about that. There are levers in the new thing. Um, at the moment, the focus is on getting the chip out and doing what's necessary for that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so I think basically we're feeling good enough about what it's doing that we don't feel a super big need to justify exactly all the trade-offs that we're making.
Mhm.
But yeah, we might resurrect that pending other things being done. And because of a bunch of things that we shuffled around, we had a tool and now we have to junk the tool and sort of rework it quite a bit because it doesn't take into account all the changes that we've made. So yeah, there is some parameter twiddling that could be done that has really complicated trade-offs.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, and I know the community will be looking forward to seeing the chip come out and diving more into the technical specifications there as well.
Yeah, for most people, it's just going to be a black box. It's going to be like Okay, sure, black box, whatever.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Absolutely. Now, with the new announcement of the plot format, we identified that K28s are going to be usable,
yeah,
and obviously the sizes are drastically different when compared to
yeah,
the current K28s and K30s.
yeah.
Do you mind going into a little bit more as to why can we use K28s now, and what are kind of the trade-offs there?
You know, the before we were just like scared about not understanding what the implications would be of going with smaller case sizes. And that's kind of how we landed on K32. Like when we started, there's like the filter and K32 being the minimum and stuff. And a bunch of that was just fear, like of unknown unknowns. We didn't have good analysis of what was happening lower down. Now we actually know what a whole bunch of the attacks are that we were just vaguely worried about before. And the and so that allows us to have a lot more confidence going down to K20. And we have countermeasures for those in as well. So because we have that much better analysis, we feel much better about enabling all the way down to K28. I mean, we kind of can't really go lower than that without monkeying with a bunch of stuff, but that's already so small that no, I don't think anyone's really clamoring for smaller than that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know one of the questions regarding that is when you have smaller K sizes, you're obviously having to check plots more frequently, whereas if
Yeah,
you had a larger K size, you're not having to check it as frequently.
yeah.
And there's a question that a user had in Discord
Mhm.
about using HDDs and essentially, is it possible with the new format to have a plot that is so rarely checked that you'd actually be able to efficiently let your drives spin down and then spin them back up maybe once
Um,
every couple of hours?
well, all right. So I don't know exactly if how the numbers work out on that in terms of how frequently they're getting checked. But you can go to probably like K34 is going to be the largest we go up to, unless people really clamor for there being higher than that. Because like the on the old format, I think like K38 is the largest recorded anyone ever actually did, and that was just to show they could, right? So we're thinking probably K34 is as high as it will go. We are open to people wanting higher. If there's a reason for that, we'll discuss it. Um, Although for now the assumption is it goes K28 through 34 in increments of two. So it's 28, 30, 32, 34. But on the what happens on the larger ones is you do get a lot less lookups every single time. However, there is a bit of a trade-off here. Well, there's two trade-offs. Number one, your granularity is going up, so the amount of potential waste at like the end of your hard drive is greater. Although you can fill those in with smaller ones, and it's a much smaller number of things that need to be filled in with the smaller ones at the end. Um, and then the other thing, I mean, we could potentially support odd numbers if people really care about that as well. Um, so that's one thing. The other thing is, as part of a countermeasure to grinding, there's some amount of grinding that's sort of built in that's like very favored. So you know exactly what it should be. Well, it's favored in two ways. Number one, it's just happens to be very efficient to grind in this very specific way. Number two, you can figure out the quality of something without doing the grind. So it's really deeply packed into the thing. That really gets you a big advantage over everything, where someone who's doing a full-blown grinding attack doesn't get the benefit of having that pre-calculated. They need to grind every single time, where if you're being honest and have the plot around, you can do these lookups really efficiently. So um, but because you're doing, but because you're the aggregate amount of compute you need to be doing here for security reasons is the same. So you're having to do the grind a lot less frequently, but the amount of compute necessary in the grind is a lot more. So that the aggregate amount you're doing over time is the same. So if you are doing these larger things, you probably want to have a GPU sitting around to actually do the reconstruction at the times you need it, so that you can have it ready in time. That's the trade-off.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. And kind of to that point about the compute at the end utilizing GPU versus CPU,
Yeah.
um, we have a question which is uh, how many petabytes is it expected that a 4090 can harvest? And, kind of what is the requirement and thresholds where you might change your hardware for compute is kind of the core of the question.
Um, the the short answer is almost any amount. Because you only really need to do it when you actually find a real block. Now, caveat about that, if you're part of a pool, you need to make your partials. And
Mhm.
partials happen much more frequently than full blocks. However, you can, in fact, adjust how frequently you get your partials in. So one thing that should be happening with the new format is pools are going to need to be a lot better about not going crazy with demanding ludicrous amounts of partials, or people aren't going to be able to keep up. So that was all something they already should have been doing, but it's much more important in the new world. So if you are running a farm, especially the big farm, you might want to generate like 100, maybe 1,000, maybe if you're a crazy person, 10,000 partials per day. Um, but I think even if you're doing that, like a single GPU should be fine because you like 10,000 partials per day, that's about 10 seconds each, although sometimes a whole bunch of them are going to arrive together. So you want to be able to do them much faster than 10 seconds. But you already want to be able to do faster than 10 seconds because when you make a real block, you want to have it ready well in advance. You can take 10 seconds, but that's getting a little dodgy, right? Um, but I think a single GPU, and it depends how high end the GPU is. I do not know those numbers. That's a question for Nick. But yeah, I think a single high-end GPU can handle like any amount of stuff. And I actually, yeah, it doesn't really matter. The question is not how much space you have. The question is how many partials per day are you making? That's the real question,
Hmm.
which is fairly independent of the amount of space that you have.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you have more partials per day, the read that the pool has on the amount of space you have is more accurate. But then you have to do more work to do all your reconstructions. That's the trade-off.
Mhm.
But
Absolutely.
even making 100 partials per day should really be plenty. It's a little bit noisy, but over the course of a month, it all averages out in May. So yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. And since we are, working with pools and encouraging them to make these updates and changes, I know we have our reference pooling code base. Do we foresee any changes that we're going to make to our reference code base?
Yeah, we're going to build support for the new format so people can just upgrade. Uh, so yeah, we're going to make a patch for that available.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, and
The
that'll
goal
definitely
is
help.
to make it so we do, most of the work here. So it's nice, painless upgrade path for everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I know the focus on making sure lower end hardware is still useful, such as the Raspberry Pis being able to run K28s is going to be very
Yeah, it gets a
impactful.
little dodgy when you want to be running off of a Raspberry Pi. So the configuration there is if you have a dedicated farm that's like all HDs running off Raspberry Pis, you can fill the whole thing with K28s and that will work. It's going to be doing more work on your drives than it would be if they were higher K sizes, but it's going to be an amount that they can handle just fine.
Gotcha.
Not
Thank
an
you.
amount you want to have running on them if you're doing anything else on them at the same time. So if you have a farm that is running entirely off of Raspberry Pis, off of real hard drives, but you're also doing something else with the real hard drives at the same time as you're farming them, but you still insist on harvesting on a Raspberry Pi, which would be really weird, then we can't really help you. But if you have that setup, you probably like the machine that's using the drives for something real should probably be, the thing that's farming off of them. And that obviously has a lot more capacity than a Pi does.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And kind of to that point of having more unique setups, will remote compute be supported?
Um, well, we're trying to make it so that's not required. We were thinking of that, and everybody hated that as a concept. Um, so I think our reference stuff out the gate won't be set up for that exactly, but there's no reason why that couldn't be the case. That like you could have it be actually this we might do out the gate. So it could be that the harvester actually sends the non-reconstructed proof to the farmer, and then the farmer is responsible for doing the reconstruction. That's a configuration you could do. And so whether the farmer is remote, I don't know, that's a semantic question of what's actually meant. But you could, in principle, make it so that the farmer actually has some other machine out there in the cloud that it's outsourcing its reconstructions to when it needs to do them, just because it was convenient for you to do that.
Gotcha, gotcha. Thank you, thank you. We have a number of other tech-focused questions, so we're going to keep diving into the nitty-gritty here.
Yeah.
We have a question about the chip 13 that was pulled, and that was the prevention of multiple signage points.
Okay, yeah. Okay, the problem with chip 13 is that it starts to make it so that having those old signage points around is required, and that's not required right now. And it turns out semantically that's a huge pain in the ass. So that's why it's been tabled basically indefinitely. But we think the grinding resistance from the new thing is so good that it doesn't matter. So yeah.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you, thank you. And that's exactly what the question was, is essentially,
Yeah.
will the new format address that similar issue?
Yeah. I
Now,
think
what about
everybody knows
the
that it doesn't matter. So yeah.
Yep. What about the plot filter? There's been a lot of questions about chip 12 and the plot filter reduction schedule that it includes. Are we going to adhere to that? Will that be adjusted with the new plot format?
Yeah, with the new format, there's a totally new filter and new schedule on it. And there will be a new schedule for the filter to get reduced over time. Uh, on the theory that, and eventually it's going to be scheduled to go down to zero, on the theory that you have a choice to make in terms of adjusting the filter in the future. Either it's scheduled to go down to nothing over time and it's soft forks to keep it in there if you want to, or it is not scheduled to go down to nothing and it's hard forks to make it go down to nothing if you want to. It's much nicer to have soft forks than hard forks, especially for something as stupid as that. So we're going to put in a slow schedule for the filter. So first off, the filter just changed to a different value right off the bat. But then on top of that, it is scheduled to go down to nothing in the future with the anticipation that we might do some soft forks to punt that out further over time. But most likely, eventually, HDs will be obsolete and all the HDs everyone had sitting around running will be dead. And then we'll wish to just let the filter go down to nothing. But eventually, you know,
Right, right.
far off definition of eventually.
Yeah, I can't even mark that one as a soon.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, thank you. And kind of to that point of different levers that'll be put in place for future
yeah,
redundancy or preventions,
yeah.
what guardrails would indicate raising the minimum K size from K28 to K30? Do you ever foresee that being needed?
Yeah, it's not terribly clear that that's a very good security measure. Like it looks like the security level of like K28 and K30 are very similar. But in general, the things that could warrant uh, tweaking of things, which is a lot more likely to be like reducing the filter than changing the case size, which hopefully would just involve letting the scheduled filter reduction happen instead of punting it out, right? Um, the 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 things that would be warning signs there would be number one, some kind of algorithmic advancement that somebody found, at which point, potentially we could be looking at not just um, a filter reduction, but an algorithm change. However, people have been banging on this shit a lot already, so we were way ahead of the game. I think all things considered, it's looking like we did an okay job of the proof of space to begin with. Not as good of a job as we did with the VDF primitive or the algorithm to stitch together proofs of space and time, because ain't nobody touched those things. But proof of space has kind of been holding up okay, which given that the attack surface is literally someone doing algorithmic stuff 100% on their own equipment, that's a really big attack surface of things that can be done there. So I'm feeling pretty good about there not being any big algorithmic enhancement, but it's a theoretical concern. Uh, The other thing would be that if the ratio of cost between compute and storage really gets out of whack, right? That just like the cost of grinding just computationally just plummets, while the cost of storage does not relative to that. That could throw things out of whack. Which again, the main thing you'd want to do there is a filter reduction, but in the extremes, maybe we'd want to do some further changes beyond that.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. Kind of to your point there about looking back and thinking to yourself, what else could have been done at first? Could we have seen
Yeah.
this happening? We have a question from Janie as to, in hindsight, is the new format obvious if you had thought of it at the time of building the original format?
Um, yeah, well, even the original format is not obvious. There were some non-trivial things done for that. Some of the things are there's like different assumptions being made. Like we were being extremely conservative about the amount of like memory that was needed to do plotting and having assumptions about that. Um, uh, I mean, it was a tall order even getting our original proof of space out when we did. I spent like I think most of 2019 working on it actually, and then I spent most of 2020 working on how to stitch everything together. So it was like maybe it was 2018 and 2020. Anyway, I spent a lot of time on it. And there's a few techniques in the new thing that I just hadn't come up with back then. I mean, it would be obvious is a strong word. Like it's there's could I have come up with it? Yeah, maybe if I'd have figured out a whole bunch of attacks that I just didn't manage to figure out at the time and had thought long and hard about countermeasures and had done a good job of coming up with the countermeasures. But that was a lot of work. I mean, it was, it's been years now, right? Since it was some number of years. It is I'm not sure when the timeline of when No SSD came out. I don't remember what the date was, but it took quite a while and quite a big honeypot of money up for grabs for anyone to actually figure out the attacks that they did. And then it's taken us, time on top of that to figure countermeasures. So, yeah, it would have been very, very hard to come up with all of that stuff. And there is a whole bunch of stuff in the proof of space algorithm where the biggest components of it seem reasonable as things to do, but also a little bit mysterious that if you're not familiar with what the attacks are, you're not going to really see why it is that you're doing things that way. So yeah, it given what we know now, it was unrealistic to expect to not have to do some kind of upgrade to the proof of space format. Could I have done better? Yes. If I figured out a bunch of stuff, I would have done better. But you don't get to speed run these things. So yeah, we were hoping we wouldn't need to do a new one. Maybe it was a little overconfident on that because definitely we do have to do one. But yeah, but I'm feeling pretty optimistic about not needing to do another one after this, at least not anytime soon. This might just last indefinitely.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I agree. While you might have been able to think through that stuff, it's not necessarily reasonable to think that you could have perceived every possible attack
Yeah.
and exploit. And
I
yeah,
mean, it was already a big achievement for it to work as well as it has. Like it was the obvious approaches are totally subject to helmet attacks and just get completely obliterated. So that was a big deal to stop those.
most certainly. Most certainly. We have a few other questions about the transition itself now, and two of them are a little focused on community harvesters and plotting systems,
Yeah.
specifically Gigahorse and no SSD. So,
Yeah.
do we have any assurances that Gigahorse and no SSD will adopt the new plot format?
Um, well, I don't know what their plans are. Uh, they like it would behoove them to like it is in their incentive over the transition period um to keep farming the main chain. Because if they don't get rewards for it. And because those things require actual compute on stuff, it's not like they can farm multiple things at the same time at no real extra cost, right? Like, so incentives are there for them to stick it out through the transition period. Um, what their plans might be, I don't know. If they came to me for advice, which they haven't, I would suggest that they make a transition plan for their users to switch over to the new format, and they just act as a pool after that, a pool that doesn't have particular advantage at compression, but just a normal pool. Uh, uh, but I don't know what their plans are. You'd have to ask them. I don't know, but we're not. It does, any policy change does hurt someone. Obviously, this change is mostly good for everybody, but does cut off a line of business for those people. So sorry, guys, but we this is part of the plans, and yeah, it
Mhm.
can't be an unalloyed good for everybody in every way, unfortunately.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I agree. As you mentioned, it would very much behoove them to migrate over to that new plot format, especially when you have, big partners like the World Bank and other larger entities that are going to be supporting the main chain that Chia
Yeah,
follows. And
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, in particular, it would be nice if no SSD switched over to like the standard pooling protocol
Mhm, mhm,
instead of their own weird thing.
mhm. Absolutely, absolutely, and help with that Nakamoto coefficient. And
Yes.
yep, yep. We have a somewhat similar question here, and it's about the Evergreen Farm. This is
Yeah.
a question from YouTube from Yo Mammy, and
Mhm.
it's how will this affect my tiny evergreen farm?
Um, the the thought is that evergreen things will be able to replot themselves. I think we've made it so that it is possible for them to do that. Uh, by just doing all K28s and like doing things that way. So hopefully not too much hiccups. They'll have to do a software upgrade to do the replot, blah blah blah, and they'll have a little bit of downtime while they're replotting, but shouldn't be shouldn't be super problematic.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank
That's
you.
the hope anyway. Not 100% sure that we're totally set up for that, but
Mhm,
we shall see.
mhm. Yeah, lot of other discussions to dive into that one, of course. And we have a question about Chia dashboard. With the new plot format, will the Chia dashboard still be able to display the K sizes? Essentially, yeah, will K sizes be available on chain?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you
Mhm.
definitely know the case size that made each proof of space.
Perfect, perfect. And then the other part of that question is about net space.
Uh-huh.
And I know during the previous hard fork that we had some issues with net space not really showing properly on the dashboard. How
Yeah,
should users
well,
think about net space during the phase-in period?
well, the there's two estimates, right, of the amount of space you're really using for old format and new format. Now, because old format is compressed by a bunch of people and we don't know what level of compression everyone's using, that makes net space much harder to guess. With new format, it's much easier to guess net space. Like, there might be something where like we don't know if people are Banish compressed or not, but that's going to be like a 5% difference or something like that. Um, so yeah, so as the transition phases in, the accuracy of the measurement of net space is going to go up. And there might be hints that help clarify what it was before based on how that transition happens as well, actually. So providing more clarity all around. So once it's done, there's going to be much greater clarity around net space. And you have to assume there's going to be some amount of dark matter that just doesn't upgrade as well. So the measured amount of net space, if you're not trying to take into account compression on the old thing, will almost certainly wind up being lower in the end. Um, Although who knows, there might be like another price spike, so there might be more space coming online as it's all happening, which is like a confounding factor. on top of everything. But in the end, mostly what's going to happen is people aren't going to need special, hardware to do compression when they're farming, and we're going to have a much clearer notion of what the total amount of net space is. So just better all around.
Absolutely, absolutely, and continually improving too. That'll be
Mhm.
great. We have a question about the GPUs that will be supported, and do you
Uh-huh.
anticipate only NVIDIA support,
Um,
or would you
we
also?
are working on supporting a bunch of GPUs. Has this whole plan for how to write code that's supported by a bunch of GPUs. That's all this GPU programming magic that I don't understand. So I'm not sure. The big questions right now, again, this thing that I keep hammering on, we're not entirely sure what amount of resources are necessary for Banish compression. That the biggest issue there seems to be not amount of compute, but amount of memory that's needed for it. So we'll see how that pans out.
Gotcha, gotcha, absolutely. And I know this one would probably be a lot better for Nick if he were here,
Yeah.
but do you expect Dr. Plotter to work with Chia 3.0 during the transition phase?
Um. Uh. I think we own Dr. Plotter now, so so we'll probably integrate the same utilities that we write for everybody for doing seamless replotting upgrade will be available there as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And then this is a little bit more of a question on the marketing side, so I might need to help answer this one, but I
Yeah.
know on the plotting side, you can definitely answer it. And
Hmm.
it's there will be a lot of outdated Chia plotting videos out there on YouTube.
Hmm.
Will CNI be creating updated video guides for the community?
We are not super great at doing that. I mean, we can do that. We can do tutorials and stuff, but they won't be as good of content as people who are actual like YouTubers. Um, but yeah, we will make guides available. Hopefully, it should be very simple to just run and sort of like here, run this thing, and just tell this thing on what date you want to start replotting, and it will do everything for you. That's the
Yep, absolutely. And I second that as well on the marketing side.
yeah.
Very likely a nice guide will be on the doc site to start, and you might see a couple of smaller videos out there after. Now we have another question from YouTube here, and it's what is suggested to new farmers that haven't yet plotted? Should they wait until the new format is available, or should they plot with the current format?
If you're plotting today, well, there's going to be a long lag, especially from today. But even after the new format comes out, there's going to be a pretty significant lag until you can actually use it. So if you have storage that you want to farm with, that's already available now, you should plot with the old format now, and then when the transition happens, replot it. If you happen to come into a whole bunch of storage capacity like a month before the transition starts, maybe then you don't bother with the old format. You just plot to the new one as well. But a lot of this has to do with a whole bunch of numbers about how long your plotting is going to take and yada yada yada. It's looking like our plotting is going to be quite speedy, actually. So probably not too much gaming of starting replotting well in advance and then planning for it to take a long time or anything. It's going to be fast enough that it's not too bad.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you. We have a question in Zoom here about contingency plans, and
Mm-hmm.
it's what if the hard fork doesn't get the support it needs? Will CNI continue building on a minority chain, or what's kind of the contingency plan if the hard fork
Um,
fails?
well, we haven't really been getting very much pushback. Um, the biggest pushback has been from just anonymous troll haters who know anything. But those people have been calling for a fork to get rid of the pre-farm already, so they can go away. The if there's not really broad consensus, and not literal consensus, but pretty close to consensus of what we're doing being a good thing. The plan would be to back off and figure out how we can modify it to get buy-in from almost everyone, like really figure out what the concerns are and what we can do about it. Because I think that should be entirely doable.
Completely agreed. And just a shout out to everybody to keep an eye open for when that chip is released. We'll announce it inside of our Discord server. We'll also have some announcements on X for it. But that'll be a great place to relay your thoughts, relay your buy-in, and kind of let us know what you're thinking and feeling about the new format. We expect that to be out within Q1 of 2025. And as a nice wrap up for us to go back to the top of the call here, how does the new plot format ensure safety against GPU attacks? And, we're kind of adding in that quantum aspect as well. Do you have any concerns about
Oh,
quantum computing?
quantum doesn't apply here. I mean, well, it does in the sense of all of our plots have a public key that does the signing when you actually make the block. So they're very not post-quantum in that sense. Um, I'm not expecting quantum computation to actually be a concern for many years, if ever. Um, there are post-quantum algorithms in general, but the actual format, the actual proof of space itself is already quite post-quantum. Because it's all symmetric cipher stuff. The actual public keys, those are not post-quantum, but those are a much bigger problem for everything. If we have to worry about those, that would suck. It's so annoying. Quantum computation isn't really useful for anything real except messing with cryptography. Arg. And yet it's AI that everyone's scared of. Like, okay. Um, uh, right. And what was the first part of it? Because I would just answer the part about quantum. But
Yeah.
yeah.
How does the new plot format ensure safety against GPU attacks?
Oh, yeah, the ratio of the amount of regrinding you have to do to the amount of work that's actually happening when you're farming is much, much greater because of
Mhm.
some tricks that we did. Oh, basically because of two tricks. One, that you're always doing a little bit of grinding when you do things, and two, that grindy reconstruction doesn't have to be done all the time,
Hmm.
because because you can figure out the quality of your thing without doing that grind. So those together, plus like starting with leaves instead of the top, which is a little harder to explain what that means. They're just general purpose techniques that are kind of confidence inspiring and good ideas um to make it much, much harder to attack by just sheer grindy computation.
Mhm. Well, thank you. Thank you. And a question outside of the plot format, and it's about the ASIC Time Lords.
Yeah.
Are there any plans for another run of faster ASIC Time Lords?
Oof. Not right now. Like we really put a big budget into the ones that we had, and it's like with current technology, making something substantially better costs like 10 times as much. So that's one of these things where it's like we'll wait like 5 or 10 years or whatever the amount of time is, probably, and don't quote me on this on the future, but I would guess, and again, don't quote me on this. I would guess in like 5, 10 years, we'll put a similar budget to what we used the last time, on the order of $5 to $10 million to make, things that are equivalently cutting edge at that time. But kind of want to wait for things for that to actually be substantially faster than what we have today, for that to happen. So that might be a while before that's warranted doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, understandable. Thank you. And a question that has gone a little bit viral on X right now is farming on phones. And
Farming
was the
on phones.
K, yep.
Yeah, so with with K28s, you can in fact farm on phones. Um, Obviously, it's not a lot of space, but you can do it. Um, and there's this plan that like your phone will get a notification whenever you get a filter pass, so that it can then wake up and only check the quality then, so the phone isn't just constantly on just for this purpose. Um, yeah, so in principle that can be done. It's not going to be they're small, so it's not going to be a huge amount of net space or anything, but you can in fact do that in principle.
Thank you. Thank you. We just hit the top of the hour here, so we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up. But as always, I like to ask you a few questions outside of the daily grind of Chia.
Uh,
And I'm sure everybody's been looking at your background and wondering what. So, do you
oh,
mind
yeah.
talking about your background?
Yeah, so Katie here is experiencing a bit of an interdimensional anomaly. Um, this is demonstrating a color filtering effect that I came up with. So normally when you do color cycling, there's one point in it which is true, and then it rotates in hue space, and then everything is opposite at some point, and then it rotates back to true again. Um, so this is what I've done here is a slightly novel effect that I've never heard of anyone doing before. Where, well, one thing I'm doing is I'm actually doing it in the OKHSL space, so the luminance is actually constant, which is not normally done, so that makes it look a lot less trippy. And the other thing is instead of having one point that's true, it's actually flipping in color space, in hue space. So at any given moment, there's two opposite hues that are true, and then the ones at 90 degrees from those are flipped over, are swapped. And so it's rotating which two opposite ones are true the entire time. So I picked this particular picture to demonstrate it with because it has several different identifiable hues that you kind of know what they should be looking at it because it has, flesh tones and greenery and blue sky. Although you might notice watching it that actually your eyes are pretty willing to go, oh, it's autumn, or like it's sunset or something, and it accepts some pretty weird hue alterations because of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, thank you. And I know for those interested in color theory, you have a couple of blogs out about that now as well. And
Yeah, I need to post the code for this and do a blog post on it, and then I'm going to declare victory on color theory and stop worrying about it.
perfect, perfect. I know I'm looking forward to that. I'm colorblind, so I always enjoy listening to your color theory, and I always learn a lot more about it also. So thank you. And yeah, Janny, I appreciate the well wishes. We hope you have some time off and enjoy the holidays also. And thank you to all the participants who joined us today, whether it be on Zoom, in Discord, or on YouTube. We really appreciate your time, the questions, and helping us dive more into these complex topics that are coming into the Chia blockchain. But as a wrap up for 2025, did you have, or for 2024 and leading into 2025, did you have any last words, Bram?
Well, we have not just new proof of space, but we have a ton of stuff for the new year lined up to do. So uh, for at the end of last year, I set goals for the new year, and my goals for the new year were get gaming shipped and lose 10 pounds. And I succeeded in losing 10 pounds. And we're going to just miss getting gaming shipped, although that was for an alpha release. So for the new year, we're going to have this thing that Gene keeps teasing that I'm not going to give any more information on right now. And gaming, the hope is to not just have like an alpha release, but like really a 1.0 by the end of the year. And to have new proof of space be on, not, we won't be done with the transition period or anything by the end of 2025, but the hope is to get to be well on our way for that transition to happening, but hopefully have it be activated or have a scheduled activation time that seems to be happening by the end of the year. Um, so that's uh, yeah. So we at CNI have a lot of stuff that's coming out next year. Just happenstance is all shipping around the same time. So that's all very exciting.
Absolutely.
In the meantime, most of us, not all of us, because of the stuff Gene's been talking about, a bunch of people are going to be doing some working over the holidays. But we try hard to make it so that Chia holidays are actually holidays. Nobody's working. So this year's a little bit of an exception. But yeah, wish everyone a happy holidays, and please do take some time off and get yourself some rest.
Thank you very much. And we will catch y'all in a month here after that big announcement that Gene keeps alluding to, and we'll have another AMA soon thereafter. So thank you for your time today. I always appreciate being able to dig into the brain that is Bram. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Happy holidays and have a wonderful day, all.
Bye, everybody.